Twitter has just gone completely bonkers. It's time to set up Mastodon. Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In this video, we're going to build our very own Mastodon server. But actually, I've already built it. I set up a Mastodon server for Learn Linux TV, and it's awesome. But I also recorded the process as I went through the process of setting it up, so that way I could give you guys a tutorial for setting up Mastodon. So what you're going to see is the actual footage as I go through the process of setting up the official Mastodon server for this channel. So this is an opportunity where you get to see me, well, actually deploy something. Now the way that I've set up this video is there's going to be time codes in the description down below, so that way you could go right to the section that most interests you, and by the end of the video, you'll have your very own Mastodon server. Now, before we get started though, there's a few things that I need to make you aware of. And the first one is that you don't actually have to self-host Mastodon. You could totally use Mastodon without running your own server. But on this channel, we love to build things, so I wanted to make sure that there was a video on this channel that goes over the process. So if you want to self-host Mastodon, well, you're in the right place. Now also, when I went through the process of setting up Mastodon, there was a few things that confused me. So I found a few blog articles that helped me understand how to set up some of the components. So what I'm going to do is give you guys a link to both of those articles in the description down below to give credit where credit is due, because some of the commands that I'm using actually came from those articles. Now the next thing that I want to go over before we get started is what you actually need to get started. What do you have to have on hand already before you can go through this process? Well, the first thing that you'll need is a Linux server, and it doesn't really matter where you get your Linux server from. I recommend a VPS provider because, well, those are public instances anyway, and our Mastodon server needs to be publicly available. So rather than go through the process of explaining port forwarding, I'm going to recommend that you set up a VPS instance. Now for the server that I'll be creating as part of this video, I use Linode for that, but the commands that I'm going to be giving you are not specific to Linode. The process that I will show you when it comes to building the initial instance is done on the Linode dashboard, but after that, everything is just straight Linux from there on out. So you shouldn't actually need a specific VPS provider to follow along with what I'm going to show you. Now the next thing that you're going to need is a domain. I'm going to leave it up to you to register that domain, but you will need a domain. So make sure you already have that purchased before you get started. If you don't already have a domain purchased, then I highly recommend that you buy your domains through Hover. That's actually my preferred registrar. Now the thing is, their domains do cost a few dollars more than some of the competing registrars out there, but their customer service is just so awesome. I highly recommend their service. They are not a sponsor. I've never spoken to them other than maybe a few help desk tickets I called in for, a few times in the past, but they are not a sponsor. I'm actually recommending them because I like them that much. There's no affiliate code or profit or anything for my recommendation. It's just what I recommend. Once you have the domain, another thing you'll need is an SMTP provider. Now you could get this from any provider out there, it really doesn't matter, but I need to leave that up to you because there's going to be a bunch of different ones out there that you might use. For me, I actually use SendGrid, but it doesn't really matter. You just need to set up an SMTP server and have the values for that server on hand when the script later in the video actually asks for those things. Now the last thing that I'll mention is that if you are going to be using a physical server for setting up Mastodon, then I'm going to leave the process of port forwarding up to you because each and every person is going to have a different router, firewall, or whatever it is you use for your networking device. It's just going to be different from one person to the next. So I can't show you that process because even if I did, well, it wouldn't match your system on your end, so that's not something that I can show you. However, if you use a VPS provider like I recommend, you don't have to worry about port forwarding at all. When you create an instance through a VPS provider, it's publicly available by default, so that box is checked. Now, one more thing. I'm going to be using Debian, specifically Debian 11, as the Linux distribution for this particular server. Now, normally I use Ubuntu 22.04, but as of the time I'm recording this video, the process of setting up Mastodon doesn't actually work on Ubuntu 22.04 because it uses a newer version of OpenSSL that Mastodon itself doesn't support yet. Now, the thing is, there's already a bug report for this, there's a pull request for this, so support for Ubuntu 22.04 is coming very soon. So yes, you will be able to use Mastodon on Ubuntu 22.04, but as of recording time, it doesn't actually work, so I'm going with Debian 11. That's what I recommend that you use as well. If you go against that recommendation and use a different distribution, unfortunately, I can't really help all that much because the commands that I'm going to be giving you in this video were only tested on Debian 11. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right into the process of building the Learn Linux TV Mastodon server, and also the process that you could follow for building your Mastodon server. Let's get started. All right, so here on my end, I'm actually logged into my Linode dashboard, and I'm ready to get started when it comes to building the instance that's going to actually become the official Mastodon server for Learn Linux TV. So I already have the domain here. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, you will need to have a domain. So I've actually picked up learnlinux.social for this particular project. So that's going to be the official Mastodon server for Learn Linux TV. It'll be located at learnlinux.social. Anyway, what we'll need to do is actually add a brand new A record here, and the A record should point to the IP address for the instance that's going to serve as our Mastodon server. Now I haven't actually created the instance yet, so I'll have that IP address shortly. Now you don't have to actually add your domain to a VPS provider like I'm doing. In fact, it's probably a lot quicker to just go into the DNS settings of your registrar and add the IP address there in the A record section, and that way you only have that one step. But I don't even have an instance yet, so what I'll do is go back up here to the top, and I'm going to create a brand new instance. So on my end, I'll create a Linode instance. Depending on what your VPS provider is, it might be called something different like virtual machine or compute instance or something like that. But basically, we need a Linux instance to serve as our server. On my end, it defaulted to Debian 11, which is exactly what I'll be using in this video. So anyway, I have Debian 11 selected here. And the next thing that we're going to do is choose our region. And what you could do is just choose whatever region is closer to you. It actually doesn't really matter all that much. Even though I'm in the United States, I think Toronto is the closest to me geographically, so I will select that. Then let's scroll down. And then here we're going to choose the Linode plan. So essentially what we're doing is we're just choosing how many CPU cores and how much RAM we want to have with our instance. In terms of Linode, we can click on Shared CPU. That'll give us a cheaper instance. And I think the 2 GB version is probably the minimum that you can get away with. With 2 gigs of RAM, you may run into an issue when we compile some of the resources later that might cause it to fail. If that's the case, you'll have to temporarily bump it up to a larger instance, and then you could always move it back down to 2 GB afterwards. But it's probably a better idea just to go with the 4 GB version anyway. That way we have a little bit of headroom when it comes to memory, we have an extra CPU core, and depending on how popular this server gets, I'll probably need more than this, perhaps in the future, but for right now, I think 4 gigs is probably fine. So we've selected our instance type here. So here we could choose a label, which is just going to be the name of our instance. You can name it whatever you'd like. My naming convention is to name the instance after its fully qualified domain name. Obviously, your domain will be different, and you might even have a subdomain, for example, and that's totally fine. Whatever your fully qualified domain name happens to be, you're going to add that right here. Now, for the root password, we definitely want a secure password for that. We definitely don't want anyone to be able to access our instance via SSH other than ourselves. So let's just make sure that we have a very good password for that, and I should be good to go on that. Now, continuing from here, I'm going to leave the VLAN section blank. Shouldn't need that. Backups. I do want backups. I think that's a good idea. So I'm going to leave that selected here. And we should be good to go. So I'll click Create Linode. And as you can see right here, our instance is being created. And also, we have an IP address for our instance now. So what I could do is copy that, and I could create my A record. So on your end, what you'll do here is you'll copy the IP address like I just did. And then you'll go into your registrar's DNS settings, find the A record section for your domain, and then you add this IP address as an A record for the root of the domain. Now on my end, since I have Linode managing my DNS, I could click on domains right here. I could find my learnlinux.social domain, so this one right here, and then I'll scroll down, and what I'll do is add an A record. And then I'll paste in the IP address for the instance that I've just created, and then I'll click Save. So now we have a DNS record for our server right here. Now it could take some time for this to propagate, which is why I'm doing this first. Now later in the video, when I add a TLS certificate to this instance, I'm hoping that by then, DNS will be fully propagated. I'm not sure if it's going to be by then, but we'll see. Now, I rarely ever see this take more than a few hours, but just in case you have a DNS provider that is slower than others, just keep in mind it could take a couple of days at most. Now, if I switch over to a terminal, what I can do to check if the DNS record has propagated is I could type nslookup and then the domain that I've registered, and I'll press enter. And what's interesting on my end, it's already showing the IP address as a match to the domain. Now, it's not going to be fully propagated yet, but it's probably replicated enough to where the IP address, at least to the DNS provider that my computer is plugged into, that one is actually showing the IP address, as you can see here. So that's what we're hoping to see. When you run nslookup and then your domain, you're hoping to see the IP address that matches the IP address of whatever instance you have set up as your server. And well, when you see that, it should be good to go. In fact, let's go ahead and get started and build the instance right now. So what I'll do is type SSH, and then root, @ and then the domain or IP address. On your end, unless you have a very good DNS provider, it's probably not propagated yet. So what you could do is just paste in the IP address like I'm doing right here, and that should be good enough. I think it'll be more fun to actually type the domain name here. So I'll go ahead and type that. And that'll really make sure that it's recognized by DNS. So what I'll do is type in the domain right here, and I'll press enter. And so far so good. I'll type yes to confirm that I do want to connect to the server. Then I'll type in the super secret password right here. And now I have successfully accessed the server that's going to become the Mastodon server. So the first thing we're going to do when it comes to setting up the instance is we're going to add a few miscellaneous things that are basically required or things that are a good idea to tweak and configure before we get started on building the Mastodon server itself. We just want to have a really good foundation on which to start. So the first thing I'm going to do is stop using the root account. That would be a very good idea. So to add a new user, I'll type add user, and then whatever I want my username to be. This is not my Mastodon user. This is just my user on the system, so I can stop using root. So I'll just use my first name. Then I'll type in a super secret password. And again. And for these, I'll just press enter to bypass all of these fields. I don't really configure those on my side. And then I'll press enter to confirm that I do want to create this user. I could always say no if I want to change the username, but this looks fine to me. Now the user is created. Next, what I'm going to do is add the user to the sudo group. That'll allow the user to run commands as if the user was root. That's actually how we escalate our permissions anytime we need more access to the server. So what I'll do is type usermod -lowercase a, uppercase G. The group is sudo, and the user that I want to add to that group is the one that I've just created. So I'll press enter. And what I'll do now is actually type exit to log out of the server. And now I'm back to my local machine here. So I'll reconnect. But this time, I will use the username that I've just created. Now, as an aside, since the local user is J and the remote user is also J, I didn't have to type the username here, but I wanted to be explicit. Anyway, I'll press enter. And now I'm logged into the server as my username. So we've already taken care of the root situation. We basically don't want to use root unless we absolutely have to. So now I have a user account that I'll be using for the remainder of the video. Now, since we've just built this server, we should apply all updates to the server. Make sure it starts with all of the latest security patches. So the first thing I'll do is run sudo apt update. And that'll make sure that the local cache for the Debian repositories are updated. So that way it knows about all the additional packages that might be available. So I'll press enter. And that one should happen fairly quickly. All right, so it tells us at the bottom that there's some packages that can be upgraded. So what I'll do is run sudo apt and then dist-upgrade. And then I'll press enter. This is actually going to install the security patches, all of the patches actually that are available. So I'll press enter to confirm that I want to install all of these. And, well, all the updates have been installed. So far, so good. Now, next, what we're going to do is set the host name, or actually the domain name here on the server. Right now, the server is known as localhost. This is going to be our Mastodon server, so we're going to want to give it a name. And what I'll do is run sudo nano. And the file that I'll be editing first is under the etc directory. And the file is called hostname, just like that. And what I'm going to do is name the server after the domain name. And that's what I recommend you do as well. So Control O and then enter, and then Control X to exit out. That saves and exits the file. And the second file that I want to edit is etc hosts. I'm going to add a new line here. And I'm adding a new IP address that's within the same address space as the loopback adapter. And then I'm going to give it the same name. LearnLinux.social. Let's save the file and exit out. Now, the first stage is done. Basically, everything that we've done so far has nothing to do with Mastodon. These are just some recommended practices that you should actually perform anytime you set up a new server. And since we've installed a bunch of updates, what we should do is reboot the entire server. You don't always have to do that, but I noticed that the Linux kernel was updated, and because of that, it's a good idea to reboot. And what we'll do is just give this a few minutes to reboot. It usually happens between something like 1 and 3 minutes. Just give it some time, and then we'll be able to reconnect to the server. So I think more than enough time has passed, so let's reconnect. I'll just press the up arrow, and then I'll press enter. And I'm reconnected. We can see that the name of the server in the bash prompt here has been updated. It's not showing the full domain, but part of the domain. But what we could do is type hostname, and that gives us the entire hostname. As you can see on my end, it's learnlinux.social. So that part is all set. And now that we have everything all set, it's time to actually start the process of building Mastodon. And the first thing we're going to do to work towards that goal is we're going to install quite a few packages. What I'll do right now is paste in all of the packages right here. That way you guys can pause the video if you need to do that, or you could check out the blog post for this particular video. It's linked down below in the description, and from that article, you can actually copy this particular command along with all the others and paste them right into the terminal. That way you don't have to worry about typos or anything like that. But anyway, what am I installing here? Well, there's a bunch of packages here, and I'm not going to go over all of these, but these are packages that are needed by Mastodon for some reason or another. For example, we have build essential. That'll give us the make utilities for compiling things. We'll need that. We'll also need Git. We're going to be checking out a Git repository. Git might not be installed on the server already, depending on the image we use to create the server. So we're going to add that. We have some shared libraries here, and those libraries will make sure that Mastodon has everything that it needs. And there's also some packages related to Node.js as well as Ruby among these right here that we're installing. So these packages should be quite a few of the packages that we'll end up needing throughout the course of this video. I just combined them all into one. So I'll press enter. And this is going to result in quite a few packages being installed. I'll press enter, and then I'll just let this run, and I'll be right back as soon as it's finished. And there we go. All of those packages have finished installing, and we're ready to move on to the next step. Now the next thing we're going to do is install Yarn. You could think of Yarn as a package manager for Node.js. Now what you could do, and do not follow along with this, but what you would probably normally do is run something like sudo and then apt install yarn. And to be fair, this will result in the installation of Yarn. But the thing is, the Yarn package within Debian's repositories is very old, and it will actually cause the process of building Mastodon later to fail. So we're not going to run this command right here. So what we're going to do instead is run sudo and then npm install global and then yarn. And what this is going to do is give us a newer version of Yarn, one that will be actually compatible with Mastodon. So I'll press enter. And now we have Yarn available on the system. And as you can see, Yarn is located in user local bin, so we're good to go on that. Now the next thing we're going to do is set up the database for Mastodon. We've already installed Postgres as part of the package installation earlier in the video, so we have everything we need when it comes to packages to support Postgres, but we don't have a database, so we definitely need to create one. So let's take care of it. And to get that process started, I'm going to switch user over to the Postgres user. That user was created as part of the installation of the Postgres server itself, so we should already have this user on the system. And, well, we do. Now, as the Postgres user, we're going to run psql, just like you see here, and that'll get us into the Postgres command prompt. And this command prompt we could use to create the actual database. So to create that database, we'll type create, then database, and we'll call the database Mastodon _ production. And then we'll end the statement right here with a semicolon. And it says create database, so that's its way of saying I did the thing that you asked me to do, so that's expected. So far so good. Next we're going to create a database user. So we'll type create user, and we'll name the user Mastodon, and then we'll end the statement with a semicolon. So now we have the role for the user Mastodon. So next we're going to adjust the user that we've just created. We're going to give it the create DB permission. And to do that, we'll type alter user. We want to alter the user that we've just created. And we're going to give it create DB. Now continuing, what we're going to do is set up a password for that user. It doesn't have one yet, and we definitely want it to have a password. So to add the password to the user, here's what we're going to do. We're going to alter user again, and we want to alter the Mastodon user. We want to give it an encrypted password. And we're going to type the password right here in the single quotes. Now for this, what I recommend that you do is create a randomly generated password. And then once you decide on what password you want to use, then you'll write that down somewhere so you won't lose it, somewhere safe. So what I'll do is paste in the password that I've generated right here. And there it is. And that's going to be our database password. I'll press enter to confirm that change. And now we have the password. Now the next thing we're going to do is give the Mastodon user full access to the database. So what we'll do is run alter database, and the database that we want to alter is Mastodon _ production, the one that we just created earlier. We want to alter the owner of the database, and we're going to give full ownership to the Mastodon user, the Mastodon database user specifically. We are actually going to be creating a Linux user named Mastodon here very shortly. Anyway, I'll press enter, and now we have that. So we'll type exit to exit out of the Postgres prompt here. Type exit one more time to return to our normal user account. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is create a Mastodon user. This is different from the Mastodon database user. We're actually creating a Linux system user, and this particular user is going to be the user account under which Mastodon itself will run. So what we'll do is type sudo and then add user. We would like a group created with our user. We want it to be a system user, and we'll name the account Mastodon. And now we have the Mastodon user on our system. Now the next thing we're going to do is actually download Mastodon. And to do so, we're actually going to check out the Git repository for Mastodon itself. So for that, we're going to type git clone, and then the URL for the Mastodon repository. And it's located on GitHub. The GitHub user is Mastodon, and the repository is mastodon.git. And now, if I clear the screen and list the storage, we have the Mastodon directory right there. And that's what we ended up with when we ran the git clone command. Next, what we're going to do is actually change directory into that directory. And then what we'll do is check out the version of Mastodon that we want to install. So in a web browser, what I'll do is actually visit that repository. And here it is. And then what we'll do, just scroll down a little bit, and we'll check out what version number is currently available as the latest version of Mastodon. And this is pretty interesting. As you can see right here, this particular version was released 4 minutes ago. And that's interesting because, well, that's never happened when a software was released as I was actually recording a video, but that's what's happening here. Anyway, from here we could tell that version 3.5.4 is the latest version, and that's all we needed from this. So what I'll do is go back to the terminal. So I'll type git checkout, and then V for version. It was version 3.5.4. And this will make sure that we are using this particular version. We want to use the latest version, so I'll press enter. And now we are actually on version 3.5.4. What I'm going to do next is type cd ... which takes me out of that directory. And if I list the storage with -L, we can see that this particular directory is owned by my user account. I mentioned earlier that we're going to be running this under the Mastodon account. So what we'll do is change the ownership of this directory to the Mastodon user and the Mastodon group. And to do that, what we'll do is run sudo and then chown -R, because we want to make sure that the change is recursive. We'll type Mastodon for the user and then colon, Mastodon for the group. And then the directory is going to be the directory Mastodon. That's here in my local working directory. We're going to change the permissions on that. And as you can see, Mastodon as the user and Mastodon as the group is what owns this particular directory. So that's all set. However, we really don't want to run Mastodon from our home directory. So what we're going to do instead is move it to a more central directory. And there's actually a dedicated directory that's a very good fit for this kind of thing. So what we're going to do is run sudo mv for move. We're going to move the Mastodon directory. We're going to move that into /var/www. So now the file is gone, but it's right here inside the var www directory. So now the Mastodon application directory is located where it needs to be located. Next, what I'll do is change into that directory. And we're going to start working with the repository. But before we do, we actually need to add the repository directory to the git safe list. Otherwise, you'll get some errors when you try to work with this directory. So to prevent that from becoming a problem, we'll run sudo and then -u. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want to run this command as the Mastodon user, not root. We want to specifically run this as the Mastodon user. And then git config, global, and --add. We're going to add a safe directory, so safe.directory. And we're going to add /var/www/mastodon. Now, as an aside, if you need to change the version number of Mastodon in the future, here's what you can do. And I'll just give you the command to check out a specific version, which we've already done. But going forward, you're going to want to do this as the Mastodon user. Otherwise, permissions might get a little wonky. So sudo -u. You don't have to follow along, by the way. Just want to make sure we're clear on that. This is just an example. We don't need to run this command at all because we've already checked out this version. But the next time a new Mastodon version is released, you'll want to run this as the Mastodon user because, again, we want to make sure that permissions aren't going to become a problem. So as long as we run our git checkouts under the Mastodon user, then we should be fine. Anyway, I'll go back to my home directory here, and let's run the next command. The next one is going to be sudo gem, and we want to install the bundler gem, which happens really quick. So that's already done. Again, that was sudo gem install bundler, as you see here. Now we're going to run a few more commands as the Mastodon user. So we're going to type bundle and then config, deployment true, just like that. And sudo -u Mastodon again, bundle config without development test. Now the next command that we need to run, we should run from within the Mastodon directory within var www. Let's make sure that we're in there. And then what we'll do is run sudo -u Mastodon bundle install. Now again, if you check out the description down below this video, what you'll find there is a link to the official blog post that'll have everything that you need for this video, including all of the commands that I'm using. So if you want to copy and paste, you can definitely do that. Just grab the commands from there. But anyway, I'll press enter and we'll get the process started. So we're going to let this run and then I'll be right back as soon as it's finished. All right, so now that's done. Now the next thing we're going to do is run the configuration script for Mastodon. So we're getting pretty close at this point. So what we'll do is run sudo -u then Mastodon. And we'll set the Rails environment. We will set that equal to production. Then bundle exec. And then rake. And Mastodon :setup. So we'll press enter. And at this point, what we're going to do is just answer every question that comes up. We'll need to make sure that we take our time and carefully enter the answers for every question. We can always rerun the setup script if we have to, but I prefer to get it right on the first try if I can. And the first question is really easy. It just wants the domain name that we plan to use for our Mastodon server. Again, mine is going to be learnlinux.social. So just double check that you've typed the correct domain right here and then press enter. When it comes to enabling single user mode, I'm going to press enter to accept the default of no, because I actually don't want to enable single user mode. So I'll press enter. Now it's asking me whether or not we're using Docker to run Mastodon, and that's not the way that we went about it. So I'll answer N for no here. Y is capital, that's the default, so I don't want to press enter, but I want to say no, so I'll just type N and then enter. Now the default here for the Postgres location is actually correct, so we'll press enter. The port for the database is going to be at 5432, which is the default, so I'll press enter again. The name of the database, it defaults to Mastodon_production, which is exactly what I named it, so I'll press enter again. Now the database user defaults to Mastodon, which is exactly what I named it, so I'll press enter. And now it's asking for the password for the Mastodon Postgres user, which is going to be the same one that we randomly generated earlier. So what I'll do is paste it in right here, and then I'll press enter. And even though it doesn't show any output at all, I did in fact paste in the password. It just doesn't show it for security purposes. So we're all set on that. And the next question is it's asking us for the Redis host. We installed Redis earlier in the video near the beginning as part of the other packages that we've installed. We'll accept the default for that as well. Enter for the port. There's no password for Redis. That's fine. We'll press enter. Now for the next question, I'll accept the default for that as well. And now it's asking me whether or not I would like to send emails from localhost. The default of no is appropriate here, so I'll press enter. So next what it's going to do is ask us about our email server or our ability to send email. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, you will need some sort of outbound email capability. So when it comes to what to enter here for these particular questions, that's going to be different for everyone. So what I'll do is enter in my information here, but on your end, what you'll do is enter in the information that your mail provider or mail service provided you when you signed up. You'll enter that information for these questions, so make sure you have that information ready. Anyway, I'll go ahead and type in mine. Now it wants to know if I want to send a test message. I'll press enter to accept the default of yes. And I'll type in my email address right here. And I'll confirm that the configuration will be written to the environment file. That's fine. And then I'll press enter to prepare the database. And now we're going to compile the CSS and JavaScript assets. I'll press enter to take care of that right now. This might take a few minutes. All right, we are getting very close now. So what I'll do for this particular question is press enter. I do want to create an admin user right now. So I'll press enter for that. Then for the username, I prefer not to use admin because that's what everyone expects you to use. So what I'll do is add my preferred username here for the admin user. And then I'll type in my email address. And then it gives me the password. So what I'll do is copy the password. Then I'll save it in a safe place, which I'll take care of off camera. But so far, we actually have Mastodon set up. There's a few more things that we have to set up before we can actually use it. But right now, technically, Mastodon does in fact exist on the server. Now the next thing we're going to do is install some systemd units. And actually, they are located right here in the var www Mastodon directory under the subdirectory of dist. And as you can see, we have some service files here. So what we're going to do is run sudo and then cp. We're going to copy everything that has Mastodon in the name, specifically anything that has Mastodon in the name, but also ends in .service. And what we'll do is copy those particular files into the etc systemd system directory. And now we have those. And now what we're going to do is tweak those service files a little bit. We could actually go back to our home directory at this point, and we could run the next command. In fact, what I'll do is paste in the command right here. Now, essentially what this is doing is it's looking for a specific string inside the file and replacing it with another string. And what this is going to do for us is just make sure that the var www Mastodon directory is referenced in the file instead of the default of /home/Mastodon. So I'll press enter. And then the next command is somewhat similar to the first. We're doing another find and replace essentially. And we're going to be running this against the same service files that we copied earlier. Next, what we'll do is refresh systemd to make sure that it understands that we've created a few new service files. And to do that, we'll run sudo and systemctl, daemon reload, just like that. And then next, what we'll do is enable all of those service files. And enable, if you didn't already know, is going to make sure that each of these service files are started when the server starts. But we also want these services to start right now. So we will add -- now. And the services we want to enable and start are going to be Mastodon-web, and then the Mastodon sidekick, followed by Mastodon streaming. And there we go. Now at this point, Mastodon is set up and technically ready to go. I say technically because, well, it's running and all the configuration for it exists, but what we can't do is access Mastodon, so a reverse proxy will help us with that. And that's exactly what we'll set up now. Just to show you what I'm talking about though, I go back here to my browser, and then I type in the domain for my Mastodon server. You can see that I get an NGINX sample page here, which is, well, not what we want. We expect to see Mastodon when we go to this URL. So let's go ahead and set up that reverse proxy. And to do that, I'll run sudo and then cp. And then inside the var www Mastodon directory and the dist directory that we saw earlier, we actually have an NGINX config file inside there. And that helps us out a lot because we don't have to create that file completely from hand. And what we want to do is copy that into /etc/nginx/conf.d. And we're going to call this file mastodon.conf, just like that. And then continuing from there, we'll run sudo nano. We want to edit that file. Some of the defaults aren't going to work for us. So we'll edit the file that we've just created. And here it is. So what we're going to do is change two things for both port 80 and port 443. So I'll just scroll down a bit here. And the first thing that we want to do is edit the server name. And we want to set that equal to the domain name that we chose for our server. So in my case, of course, learnlinux.social. Now in the line right below that, this is actually incorrect. So what we'll do is change this right here to /var/www/mastodon and then public. We'll continue to scroll down a bit here. We have the server name here yet again, so let's correct that. Again, we'll use the same domain. Let's continue on. And right here, we're going to do the same thing that we did earlier. And we'll set the document root to var www/mastodon/public. Now the next thing we're going to do is add an SSL certificate. And this particular certificate is going to be one that we will never use. But if we don't have something here, then the whole process is going to fail. So what we're going to do is add a temporary certificate just to check the box. And then we will replace that certificate with a valid one here shortly. So what I'll do is paste in the lines that you'll add right here. And there they are. And that should be all we need to do in this particular config file for now. So let's save it, Control O and then enter, Control X to exit out. And to make sure that all of these changes take effect, we'll run sudo systemctl, restart, and then NGINX. Let's check the status, make sure that it is in fact running. And it is. So Q breaks us out of that, and we're ready to continue. The next thing that we're going to do is take care of that certificate problem. I mentioned that we needed to have a temporary certificate, which we've added, and we'll never use it. So let's actually add the proper certificate, and we're going to use certbot to take care of that for us. Now what we're going to do is use the snap package manager to install certbot. And I understand that not everyone is a fan of snap packages, but this is coming directly from the certbot documentation, and it's their recommended approach, so that's why I'm going with this approach. So I'll run sudo apt install and then snapd, just like that. We'll press enter. And then the next thing we're going to do is install the core snap and refresh it, make sure that everything is up to date. So that'll be sudo, then snap, install, then core, semicolon, sudo snap refresh core, and then enter. And now it's added. Next, what we'll do is actually install certbot. And to do that, we'll run sudo snap install -- classic. And then the package that we want to install is the certbot package. And, well, now that's done. Now the next thing we're going to do is create a symbolic link. And there's the command right there. And what this is going to do is make sure that certbot is available from user bin certbot. When you install packages via the snap package manager, that puts the binaries in a different folder. But at least with this, we make sure that certbot is accessible from the, standard directory as well as the snap directory. And, well, that's pretty simple. Now, next, what we're going to do is attempt to get a certificate for our server. And this actually depends on DNS being fully replicated. If you get an error here, you might want to wait a few hours and then try again later. But I'll just give it a shot. So we'll run sudo and then certbot, and then --NGINX. So I'll press enter, moment of truth. Let's see if DNS has actually fully propagated. And we'll find that out shortly, but we have a few questions here to answer. So it wants to know what email address we want to add to the certbot registration, and this should be a real email address. That way, if there's any problem renewing the certificate later, you'll be able to see an email that'll let you know that there is a problem, and that'll help out if that ever happens. But what I'll do is type that in right here. I'll type in my email address, and then I'll accept the terms by typing Y and then pressing enter. Then I'll answer no, I would rather not receive any newsletters or anything like that. And then right here, it's detected the domain from the NGINX config. So I will choose number 1. It's the only option anyway. And then I'll press enter. And there we go. The process was a complete success. Now, if you have a problem with the domain, again, just wait a little while longer. Depending on where you registered your domain through, you might wait longer, but it's going to be different for basically all of you. It could be anywhere from 15 minutes to maybe a handful of hours. But once it's fully replicated, then you should see a message just like this one that lets you know that the process is complete and you are able to get a certificate. Now what we're going to do is just double check and make sure that we can reach the Mastodon server. So back in a browser, and I still have the NGINX start page here that was there before we configured the reverse proxy fully. So what I'll do is refresh the page right here. And check that out. We have Mastodon. It's all set and ready to go. You can actually start using it right now. But there's a few more things that I recommend that you set up before we continue. And this will add a little bit of extra security. So back here in the terminal, let's go ahead and set up some additional components. And the first thing that we'll do is set up unattended upgrades. And to do that, we'll run sudo apt install. And the package name is unattended upgrades. So let's install that. I'll press enter. So now that we have that installed, we can benefit from unattended upgrades. Just like the name implies, unattended upgrades will automatically install package upgrades. But we may want to configure this a bit. The defaults are okay, but we might want to change a few things around. So what we'll do is run sudo nano, then we'll edit /etc/apt, then the folder is apt.conf.d, and the file is 50 unattended upgrades. So let's edit that file. And then what we'll do is scroll down a bit here. We're looking for the reboot option. And here it is. So by default, automatic reboot is disabled. So let's uncomment this. And we're going to set this to true. So anytime a reboot is required after packages are updated, we are going to allow the server to automatically reboot. And yes, this does mean that if anyone is using your server, they are going to get booted. Generally speaking, I think people will survive if they aren't able to access the server for a few minutes. Security is definitely more important than convenience. And also, let's uncomment this one right here. We want to make sure that the automatic reboot happens even if a user is signed in. And then here we can set the time. So what I'll do is set that to 4 in the morning. I think that's probably fine. And I'll uncomment that. And that should be all of the changes that we need to make to this file. So we'll save it, and then we'll close out of the file. And then the next thing that we're going to do is install CrowdSec. CrowdSec is free, and it adds some additional security to our server. It's something that I've covered on this channel before. So what I'll do is paste in the command right here for setting up the CrowdSec repository. And here it is. Now I always recommend that you check scripts before you run them. I've already checked this offline, so I know that it's safe. But it's just a good practice to check things before you just blindly accept things, especially things from the internet. But anyway, what I'll do is press enter, and this should set up the repository. And it did. So what we'll do now that we have the CrowdSec repository is install CrowdSec itself. So we'll run sudo apt install CrowdSec. And now we have that installed. And what CrowdSec is going to do is watch the server for intrusion attempts, and if it detects one, it's going to log that attempt. It's not actually going to do anything about it, but it will keep track of any intrusion attempts that it detects. Now what we could do is install a CrowdSec bouncer, and what the bouncer is going to do is take action if CrowdSec itself notices some sort of intrusion attempt. So in order to have the complete package, where intrusion attempts are detected and something is also done about it, we will need to install that bouncer. To do so, we'll run sudo and then apt install. And then the package is going to be CrowdSec -firewall -bouncer and then IP tables. So we'll press enter again. And now CrowdSec is fully installed, including the bouncer. Let's just double check and make sure that CrowdSec is running. And it is. Let's also make sure that the bouncer is running as well. So that's going to be systemctl status CrowdSec firewall bouncer. And that's running as well. And actually, well, that's it. We have some basic security here. I highly recommend that you check out my SSH security video, which I'll leave a card for right about here. And that'll help you further secure SSH. I highly recommend that you do that. And I also highly recommend that you add some additional security to your server. But so far, you have a decent starting point for sure. And right here, we have the official Mastodon server for Learn Linux TV. How cool is that? So you've not only seen the process of setting up Mastodon, you've actually witnessed me setting up the real, actual Mastodon server for this channel. So there you go. We now have our very own Mastodon server set up and ready for action. This was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed setting up Mastodon. And I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, then please click that like button to let YouTube know that you liked this video. That would really help me out. Anyway, in the meantime, I have some other videos that I need to edit for you guys, so I'm going to get back to that. But hopefully you enjoy your Mastodon server, and I'll see you in the next video.